Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Never thought I had a soulmate. Never was the one to believe in cosmic love. Never thought that there'd be someone who could keep a smile on my face. You take the time to hear my thoughts. You look at me in wonder and awe. Not sure what I did to deserve you, but I'll pay my debts no matter. You came along, you walked into my life so easily. You came along, I can't see my future without you. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I can't see my future without you. Somehow the rest of the world melts away as you stand there watching me in adoration. I feel irrationally logical, lost and naive, thinking I believe you could never hurt me. You came along, you walked into my life so easily. You came along, and I can't see my future without you. You came along, you walked into my life so easily. You came along, I can't see my future without you.
Anastasia, it's Mitch Hampton from Journey of an Aesthete podcast.
Hi, how are you?
How are you doing? It's great to have you on our show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little blurb in front, which I always do, just to make it a little more structured and say, you know, I have many kinds of guests on my show. Some are people I know personally, some are people I've never met, and then occasionally, sometimes my guests contact me, and in your case, you contacted me on the FB,
I did.
also known as Facebook. I like to call it the FB, and you I'm really happy you did, because initially I only knew about you as a music therapist, and I thought, well, that's good because we've never had a music therapist on our show, so this would be the first time we've had a show on that topic. But then, of course, I began exploring and saw Anastasia Rose. You're a folk singer, and you play ukulele and write songs and guitar and all these songs, and you're a gigging musician, and I was just very impressed. And I thought, well, this is a lot to talk about. And I thought, you know, I guess since you've done so much in music and helping people and therapy, I guess we can start from the beginning or early on, how you came to have the talent you have, and a little bit of bio, if you don't mind getting into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really fortunate to have a very creative mother. She was a visual artist. She played piano as kind of a hobby, but from a very young age, she started teaching me kind of some basic piano, and I like to say that I was playing the piano before I could walk, and I was singing before I could talk. And
great phrase, if you don't mind me interjecting a little bit. So when you say before you could talk, you mean like a toddler or earlier, or what were you?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were playing melodies, or is it because you had really good relative pitch, or were picking out songs? Or?
Oh, I mean, we're all musical children to some extent, and so I mean that in that I was just always drawn to music, and I was always babbling and sort of singing in that way. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily in a virtuosic way, but there was definitely a connection there. And I remember just walking around the house and making up little songs. Like as a child, like one of my earliest memories is just making up songs about random things that I was seeing in the house. And so that's always, I've never known a time without music being a central part of my life. I started formal piano lessons when I was in elementary school, probably like 7 or 8 years old. And then I joined band in middle school. I just couldn't get enough music in my life. That was constantly what I was doing. I was in musicals in high school.
May I ask what musicals you performed in, just of any titles?
So the one that I was in high school was just kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of different musicals. Annie Get Your Gun, Little Shop of Horrors, kind of highlights from a lot of different musicals.
So what did you do, Annie? Did you get to perform Annie, or did you do another character?
No. What did I do? Actually, that's a great question. I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Get Your Gun is such a great show, and as you know, Ethel Merman was the star who put that on the map. That show on the map back in the 40s or 50s. So, but it sounds like you did a lot of different shows then.
They were all. It was like a variety sort of thing. But in college, I studied music, and piano is my primary.
Okay.
I got my bachelor's and my first master's degree in music. My first master's degree is actually specifically in neurologic music therapy.
Interesting.
And my second master's degree is in mental health counseling. So I integrate those parts of my expertise. Uh-huh. And I work, I own a private practice.
Yeah,
as well as performing.
I wanted to mention that because you have such a great website. Is this practice what's the name? It has a specific name. It's in Colorado.
Yes, it is called Creative Remedies. Creative
Remedies, and this is your creation, your business.
Yep. My business.
That's amazing. So if you don't mind going back a little bit, you're doing piano and getting 2 masters. But what was I'm just very curious, how did you become interested in psychology, mental health, neurodivergence, these kinds of things? When did that start to occur? What was that? Was that around the same time as the music, or piano was a little bit after? Or?
Growing up, music, I would say it was probably after, but when I was in high school, I thought I was going to study music education. I thought I was going to be a band director or a music teacher of some sort, which I also do that, but on kind of in a different than what I expected at that point in time. And so I was always really interested in how people, like what made people tick.
Absolutely. How
people work.
Yeah.
And I knew that music had a profound impact on me. Because anytime, as an angsty teen, as we all were at some point in our lives, music it sounds kind of cliche, but it felt like music was the only thing that understood me at certain points in my life, and the only outlet that could really speak to where I was at emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the same for a number of my friends. I grew up in a kind of a rural area, so there were some lower income families and things like that. And so some of my friends, music was pretty much all that they had. And so it was a protective factor, it was a saving grace for them. And I read a lot. I'm kind of a bookworm in that way. And so I really got into like reading memoirs, particularly around like mental illness and addiction and neurodiversity and stuff in high school too, which I started to notice a correlation of a lot of the memoirs mentioned music being helpful in people's lives, and it was an important outlet for them. I learned about music therapy, I guess a little bit before undergrad, but there was a music therapy program where I did my undergrad, and I decided that I'd study that to kind of integrate all of these interests that I had, and I knew that I wanted to be really connected to people. I was teaching horn for...
That's a tough instrument to be playing and teaching. That's very accomplished, the horn. You don't need me to tell you, there's a big difference between horn and some other things. So you were teaching horn.
Yeah, I was a horn instructor for a few different high schools in the North Texas area around where I grew up. And there was one student I had in particular. I think that this was really kind of a shift from like my performing and teaching to like, okay, I need to do more with people. This young woman just was struggling with a lot of family things, was even cutting a little bit like on her skin and stuff. And we stopped our horn lesson and just sat and talked for a little while. She started crying. And at that point, I was not trained. It was, looking back, probably not the most, the best idea, but I had noticed that there was just a different sort of relationship that we had. And I think I attribute that to music and the vulnerability that it takes to learn music too.
So what you're saying is this one lesson with one particular person in high school planted a seed in your mind of maybe doing other careers involving actual therapy or psychology. You're saying that had an influence on the decision making or on that experience? Yeah. So that's what I was doing whenever I was getting my bachelor's degrees. I was teaching at a number of different high schools, and that was a really memorable and really important moment that I think put me on a different track. Interesting. I mean, I'm very taken with your versatility and eclecticism. I'm very eclectic myself, but you take it to you French horn and guitar and writing songs and like the song Cosmic Love, which I hope to introduce our episode with if that's permitted. It's a really, absolutely, really good song and a really traditional, catchy lyric. That seems to me at first ear or first blush far away from talking about the French Hummel French horn Mozart concerto. It seems like a very different world of music, and yet you seem to be doing all these things. And I guess I'm wondering about that journey from doing more sort of classical or band music into more folk and singing and singer-songwriter. Were the two things you were always doing, or was it just a journey, or you decided you want to do something different? It's interesting to me. Yeah. I mean, I think the answer is kind of multifaceted. I've always had a wide music
I've always listened to a wide variety of music.
Okay.
And so, and I grew up in North Texas, so folk and all of that is very, that's very much the style that I'm very familiar with in that area. And as I studied music therapy, some of the education that music therapists get is learning guitar, learning ukulele, singing, playing the piano, and using that in a functional way to help people address their whatever needs they have, or to build on strengths that they have too, not just necessarily focusing on needs. And so the live music experience is really important in music therapy. So that was kind of what started that. I took guitar classes in undergrad, and I took percussion classes and other things in undergrad, just studying music. And I, had fun writing songs, but then started to take it a little bit more seriously as I became a music therapist. And realized this is also my own, therapeutic experience in a way too. And so that's whenever I recorded Cosmic Love and some of the other things that I've released, all around. I can, like I said, growing up, I could never get enough of music, and that's still the same now. I am always looking to learn new instruments, to try new things. So any sort of songwriting and composition challenges that I can take on, I will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see and on your really good website, I recommend people go to your website because it's really well done, and there's a lot of material on it. I see that you're playing a guitar, electric keyboard.
That's correct.
Wow. So you really are using all of your skills, or all of your musical skills as much as you can across the board. Yes,
absolutely. I play in a few other projects too, and actually the guitar I mainly play with a ska punk band, punk rock sort of project called Then I Fly.
Then I Fly.
Then I Fly, yeah.
Okay, so you're going back to that student who you seem to help, or seem to be awakening something in you. What was the next step after that? What did you're reading memoirs? What were some of the memoirs you read that were powerful at that time, or that you sort of, the literature part of it or the prose part of it, you're reading memoirs?
Oh, wow. I haven't thought about this in a little while. One was called Get Me Out of Here.
Uh-huh.
That was the story of a woman who has borderline personality disorder, and kind of her journey with that. There was one called Stick Figure about anorexia, and also the writers in our world.
I've read Stick Figures. That's a really good book.
It's won a few awards, and let's see, Kissing Doorknobs. That's about obsessive compulsive disorder. Let's see.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot. Yeah. Those are the ones that stand out. But there were plenty more. I've listened to a lot of. So I went to Colorado State University for my first master's degree, and Temple Grandin teaches there. She's autistic, and so I've heard her speak numerous times. And so even though I haven't actually read any of her books, but she actually has been involved in the music therapy department at Colorado State University too.
I'm
so that's also influencing.
I identify as autistic.
Really?
Yes, I don't know if you knew that. And I initially thought when I discovered you were involved with neurodivergence, I thought that was one of the reasons you contacted me. But I received my diagnosis at the late age of 49, 50 years old.
Wow.
Not knowing not even thinking about it in any serious way for 50 years, really. Just living my life. And it's interesting. And the term neurodivergence is a fairly recent one, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you don't mind talking about that word and what it means and how it differs from other approaches to autism, or is that too much off topic, or do you want to? There's a lot to talk about.
No.
Just thought I would.
Yeah. That's great. So how I explain neurodiversity to people in my life as well as my own clients is that neurodiversity is the other end of the spectrum from the medical model. So the medical model of looking at any sort of difference, not just autism, not just ADHD, which I have ADHD, combination ADHD. And so I'm a little bit in that world too. Mm-hmm. The medical model looks at where is the deficit? How do we change the deficit? How do we make someone more quote unquote normal? Mm-hmm. How do we help someone function in a quote unquote normal society, rather than the neurodiversity model, which looks at just the difference in brain structure and the difference in brain function and the benefits that can exist. There's a really great book called Neurodiversity, actually, by Thomas Armstrong, who he's done lots and lots of research in neurodiversity. And this particular book, each chapter is about a different neurodivergent experience. So autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and makes a case for throughout human history, each of these experiences, these neurodivergent experiences, served the greater good of whatever community that person was in, or whatever tribe, or whatever. For example, what connects to me, having ADHD myself, is that the ADHDers were the ones who were like the lookouts. We were the ones kind of overseeing and watching out for the community as a whole, because we notice little things, notice little changes, really can, the shiny object kind of idea, but using that to protect the community, for example. And so neurodiversity movement looks to see the internal world and the perspective of the person who's neurodivergent, right, and the benefits that person brings to the society as a whole by just simply having a different neurology, rather than someone or something that needs to be fixed or changed or molded to be, quote, normal. Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you being on our show, because our show reflects many points of view, and certainly we've had many kind of artists on our show of the broadest spectrum of mediums and styles and instruments, and so it's great to hear you discuss neurodiversity, since it is a relatively recent concept, I think, right? It's not. What do you? How does that concept, or that I should say reality, interact with your music making and your? I'm sure it plays a role, and so.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering what relationship is like for you. Yeah.
For me personally, I think part of the reason why I play so many different instruments is because of my ADHD. I'm always looking for the new, the new shiny thing. And I can hyper focus But what I tend to do is get really, really into one instrument for a little while, or one genre of music or one piece or whatever for a while, a few weeks, and then I shift to something else. But I've found that just being in music in general keeps my emotions regulated.
Interesting.
Which is an aspect of my ADHD experience. It's just struggling with emotional regulation. But the way that I do that is sort of by switching different instruments and stuff. I think that also kind of comes out in my songwriting too, in that I was actually on tour last week with my band Occam's Rose, and one of the things that a band that we played with said is that our music has movement. And I think what they meant is that there's just really starkly different sections to each of our songs, which I attribute that to like just getting bored with a song that sounds the same all the way through, and having a craving to like throw in a random horn solo, or throw in a random trumpet solo, or throw in, something that just in the moment, kind of impulsively, I decide, hey, this might be a fun idea. Let's try this. And it sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. In those cases, I think it does.
To me, it seems the most logical thing in the world. I mean, to me, that's one of the definitions of good music. All good music, or great music, has development. And so how much do you think that aspect of music just comes from just innate musical sense, or your own musical education? That music has to have development and not be the same thing if you have different sections. And that seems very natural to me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it certainly could be an intersection of a number of different things. It's definitely hard to say because, music has been a part of my life forever, and I've been a consumer as well as a producer of music forever. So I'm not sure where that really comes from entirely.
Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Yeah. Is Regina Spektor a big influence?
Yeah, actually.
I hear a lot of that you're saying, actually. A little bit.
Really?
Oh, yes.
That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
Very much so.
Thank you.
It's interesting that you use guitar, acoustic guitar. How much of you talked about growing up in a rural environment? I grew up in big cities, and I know next to nothing about rural life. How much difference does that make? It makes a lot, right? I would understand. Is there a difference in musical? It's something I don't really know a lot about. What do you think about, say, Texas or Denver or places like that?
Yeah. I live in a completely different area than, in almost in every way than where I grew up. I grew up, in a very, rural, small town Texas. Technically where I grew up didn't even have a zip code. We used the next town over zip code because it was so small. And now I live in one of the largest suburbs of Denver.
Interesting.
And so I was fortunate in that where I grew up, my parents moved out there because they could, not because they had to. There were a lot of people who they could not afford to live anywhere rather than a rural area. And I think that definitely shaped my empathy in a lot of ways.
Interesting.
Seeing like real poverty but not having necessarily to experience it because my family didn't, was, again, they chose to move that far away from the city and from kind of civilization as a whole. But it, I think, has kind of integrated into my songwriting, and not so much some of the songs that I've already released, but songs that are in the works right now, talking about wage disparity and talking about just disparity across a number of different intersections of race, ability, neurodiversity, and the area that I grew up in, seeing people who could not afford to live anywhere else, was very humbling.
Yeah. Well, the affordability is a class issue, and it certainly has to do with things like wages and salaries, and we live in a profoundly unequal society in ways greater than we sometimes want to tell ourselves, and certainly that's going to play a role in subject matter of art, certainly in lyrics and music. How do you feel living in a place like Denver after being in rural? What is your feeling about that? I've never been to Denver. I know nothing about it, but Colorado? How do you feel living there? The differences or the similarities or?
Yeah. So I moved to Colorado in 2013 to pursue my first master's degree. And it was, I knew basically no one, aside from I moved here and had a partner who already lived here. So the only people that I knew were the people that he knew.
Okay.
And so in a lot of ways, I got to sort of check in and reinvent myself. Got to be who I chose to be rather than like what I had grown up as, or like what, the associations that other people had of me. But I think that's pretty similar for people who just move anywhere in general. You can, it's an opportunity to just sort of start over in a way. Yeah. Not necessarily that I needed to, but just the kind of freedom and liberation that, and also, fear and anxiety that evokes. So I initially moved to Fort Collins, actually, so it's smaller than Denver, and that was a little bit easier of a transition. It was about the same size as the college town that I had done my undergrad in Denton, Texas. So that was a fairly similar, like that transition was not bad aside from just not knowing anyone. Then moving to Denver, that was big. I really love the music scene here. I think that's what stands out to me the most is just there's always a show happening, or there's always a venue that's looking for artists to play. Well, that's
that one thing. That's the most positive thing. I mean, that's the as I'm a pianist composer. Finding places to play, that's really important. I was astonished to hear you say you just completed a tour. Is that true?
Yeah.
So, especially after the pandemic, talk about that process of actually touring. What is talk a little bit about that, doing that, and the logistics of that, because that's quite an accomplishment given everything going on, right? So,
it is. It was. Sort of conflicting in that with one of my other bands, we actually had a tour planned out in 2020. And of course, we all know how all of that went down. We ended up canceling everything. Actually, just all of the stuff that we had planned that year changed. But it was still something that I was like, I need to do this. I need to get it on the road. And I had toured with... I marched drum corps in my late teens, early 20s. And while that's a very different sort of touring situation and circuit and stuff than, kind of an independent band.
Yeah.
It still was like, you get to just being on the road and getting to perform in a bunch of different places and stuff. Yeah. It's like a hugely, once you've had a taste of it, you crave it. And so I knew I needed to get on the road again with at least one of my projects. And so earlier this year I was picking up some steam because while the punk rock band was facing some difficulties for a number of different reasons, particularly surrounding the pandemic, my solo music was really picking up because that was much safer for venues to take on.
Now, when you say music, is that sort of like the material, like Cosmic Love with more guitar or
right,
smaller? I mean, because that's the stuff I know best of you, and I think it's really terrific. Thank you. But it's interesting to think of you doing these all other styles of music. It makes me want to listen to everything. I'm sorry I wasn't able to investigate all of it before the show, but
that's okay.
I do what I can, but so you find yourself doing more solo type material now, or shows, or is it?
Well, I was, yeah. And so I had actually asked one of my friends who's now playing drums in another of the punk rock project too, to sit in, and we ended up developing a duo out of that. So we decided, this is going really well, and the venues are similarly to like the solo stuff. Venues are much more open to having a solo or a duo come and play, because that's easier to kind of keep people safer rather than like a full band, and it's cheaper for them. There's a number of different reasons. And so this summer I was like, well, this is going well. I know a lot of places in Texas. Since I grew up there, would you want to do a mini tour? And so we did. We embarked a couple weeks ago on a week-ish, 10-day-ish tour in North Texas, performing in a couple of different places in Dallas and Denton, Richardson, and then we did an interview for the Dallas Music Network as well.
Yeah. Well, it's great you're able to do that and sort of find a way to forge and do your music. That's, doing a tour. That's really great.
Yeah. It's definitely a strange time to be doing those things. Yeah. I mean, of course, masking up, in Denver, all of the venues are requiring vaccine cards or a recent negative test. And so, it's one of those things that I feel like, we need to be safe and we need to be aware and we need to do what we can. But at the same time, we also need to live our lives because our mental health matters too. And just sitting in fear is not good for us.
Right, sure. It's interesting because we're living in such extraordinary times, and yet others. It strikes me, if you don't mind me putting it this way, that there's also opportunities to do new things. To try new things. So, what do you think about that in terms of the opportunity aspect, or try to reimagine things differently, like politically, or do you have any thoughts about that or ideas about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the music, all of the music projects that I'm in would look completely different right now had it not been for the pandemic. Half of the members in Then I Fly quit actually in 2020, and so we have two two new members that now have brought completely different dynamics to that band. This duo, I never had any plans for starting this duo that just went on tour, but we're doing really well there, and we're actually going on another tour, in a short weekend tour in February. We're playing at a hot springs in Durango for a whole weekend. Okay. And that's nothing that I ever thought would happen. But at the same time, also on a political or global level, I think that the disparity that we've kind of alluded to earlier has become more apparent during this time, and the opportunities for activism have increased, and the opportunities to radicalize people in a good way has increased.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's another positive opportunity.
Yeah.
Of course, I say that admitting my bias that I am a radical politically, but one person's radical, maybe another person's common sense, right? So.
Sure, that's true. That's true.
So,
I think that the lockdown last year offered a lot of people the opportunity to take in more knowledge and maybe more media or whatever than they would have otherwise. And that influenced a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests that were so common and so big last summer. And I really think that had the lockdown not happened, there just would not be as much opportunity for people to recognize George Floyd and recognize the importance of organizing to shed light on these issues. And so it's an interesting thing, none of us, I don't think anyone would be happy about the pandemic or be happy about COVID, but the things that have come out of it, I think there are some really positive silver linings in that hopefully will have really positive waves throughout several generations.
Well, there's that phrase from the great Joe Hill, one of the founders of the IWW. He says, "Don't mourn, organize." Right? What are some other ideas or things you want to talk about connected either with your music or music therapy or even politics that you come up that you want to say now, or thoughts or reflections or anything?
Yeah. Well, first I want to thank you for having me on your show. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity, and this is such a neat show. And so eclectic too. You mentioned that I was eclectic. It sounds like you're very eclectic too.
It's an important
great.
I understand that not everybody's into that, but that's okay. But,
I appreciate it. I think if there is any last sort of thing that I'd impart is, I guess, kind of tying all of these things together, that music can be healing. It can also be organizing and can help people, further their activism. It can also be a place where people can be their authentic selves. If we think about neurodiversity, and where people can be honored and in that space for who they are and what they bring to the table, that maybe they're not safe to do so in other places. And I think that permeates all of the topics that we've discussed today. And that's what brings me back to it all the time. Is there's never, you never reach the pinnacle of doing all that you can in music. There's always more, and there's always different ways that we can use music to better the world, to shed light on different parts of our world, or to make the world more beautiful. There's a Kurt Vonnegut quote that I don't quite remember exactly how it goes at the moment, but it's something to the effect of, no matter how horrible our government becomes, the music will still be wonderful. And I think that there's so much there in that statement, that there's so much that music can do for us. And sometimes
that leads me to the idea, of course, government doesn't have to be government. In other words, we're probably only at the beginning of imagining what government could be. That it can't be, reduced to simple formulas like political parties and nations and borders, and that it's a lot more potential than those sometimes very narrow ways of framing it, right? So yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited you're touring. So you're saying in February you're performing. You already have some gigs lined up and things in February.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we've got. We perform very regularly in the Denver metro area, but yeah, we're leaving town to go to Durango, Colorado, which is pretty close to the Four Corners area, to do some shows out there, which will be really fun. To go to the Durango Hot Springs, where there's entertainment for that weekend, which is pretty cool.
Well, that's important that we get that out there so people can come hear you and hear your music.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I'd like to thank you for your generosity and time and talking about these things. And even good things come to an end like this. But again, any last thoughts about music or art or politics or life that you want to leave our listeners, Anastasia?
Yeah. I guess if you are creative, never stop creating. If you don't necessarily identify as being a creative, maybe start to delve into some of that. Hobbyists are just as important. You don't have to be great at an art to start with for it to matter and for it to have a profound impact on your life. I think sometimes people get caught up in, trying something and then it doesn't go super well at first and struggle with being a beginner. So I would encourage people to not be afraid of being a beginner, have creativity in your life, have music in your life. I think that's what's going to get us through all of these things. Plus, it's stimulating for your brain. So the science says that if you are reading, engaging in art, if you're writing poetry, if you're engaging in music, that's really good for your brain and actually will delay the onset of dementia, for example, and it will delay other cognitive decline, which we all want to, right? Right. So if nothing else, do good things for your brain.
Well, that's really beautifully put and important. And I'd like to thank you, Anastasia. And I hope our podcast brings you more listeners for what you create. And,
thank you.
And thank you for that. Thank you for being on our show tremendously.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good show in February. Shows in February.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.